We are now ready for panel 1, which will be covering security orchestration and retaining top cybersecurity talent. It's going to be moderated and led by Sean Atkinson, the CISO for the Center for Internet Security. Right after this panel, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to stop by each one of the experts' virtual booths in our virtual exhibition hall. Sean, thank you for joining us again, and take it away.
Thank you, Bradford. Appreciate that. So Sean Atkinson, the Center for Internet Security is home to the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, as well as the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, as well as home to the CIS benchmarks and the CIS controls. Let me turn it over to Nimmy to introduce himself. Nimmy.
Hi, thank you. So yes, my name is Nimmy Reichenberg. I'm with Siemplify. If you haven't heard of Siemplify, we're really the #1 independent provider of security orchestration, automation, and response, or SOAR for short. So we're 100% focused on helping security operations teams work more effectively and efficiently using orchestration and automation.
Fantastic, thank you. Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Pittman. I'm with BlackBerry. So I run sales engineering here. So our products run the gamut from endpoint security, application security, file level security, and kind of everything in between that zero trust framework.
Perfect. Scott?
Hi, everyone. Scott Giordano. I'm senior counsel with Spirion. We're a premier publisher of data search and classification software.
Fantastic. Nathan.
Hey, good morning. I'm Nathan Wenzler. I'm with Tenable. We are the founders of the Nessus scanning tool from years back, and the leader in the risk-based vulnerability management space. Very, very happy to be here with all of you today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathan. And Kevin.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Romero. I'm a sales engineer here at ReliaQuest. We are essentially, that extension to the team. We've been helping customers over a decade gain visibility, enhance threat detection and response, and really helping to move that program forward. So happy to be on board with everyone here today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. Let me jump into kind of the panelist questions that we have. The first is, what type of tasks can we automate with a SOAR solution, that really frees up time that we're spending on routine tasks by, our individual security teams? Nimmy, what's your perspective?
Sure. So I think really, if you look at the rise of SOAR and why SOAR has become so popular these days, if I succinctly summarize it, it's the fact that we've got a lot of tools on the one hand and a lot of manual processes, but many of these tools, almost all of these tools, have a good level of APIs today, right? So really, when you think of it, anything that you can, on the one hand, invoke programmatically, which is pretty much everything these days using one of your tools, and on the other hand, is something that is repetitive in nature, mundane, doesn't really require a lot of critical thinking, is kind of primed for automation, right? If I try to break it down to specifics, so it can be anything from specific actions like threat intelligence enrichment, for example, right? There's nothing too glamorous in taking an IP address, manually inputting it in threat intelligence, seeing what comes out, and then acting on that, right? That's something that easily can be automated. So anything from that up until a complete use case, right? Probably the most common use case in SOAR that people automate, or we see our customers automating, is phishing, right? So that concept of taking an email, again, using threat intelligence to see if it's known good. If it's not known good, doing things like deleting similar emails from the inbox, or informing the user, or forcing a password reset, or things of that nature, can all be automated using what we call a playbook, which is essentially a series of API calls, right? So that's kind of at a high level, again, practically phishing, malware investigations, threat hunting, user interaction. There's a whole slew of use cases for SOAR.
Oh, fantastic. Kevin, the same question. What are your thoughts in terms of freeing up the time that we're spending on these routine tasks?
Yeah, I think Nimmy hit on a lot of great points, right? That initial, low brain power, high volume task of, maybe getting alerts into not alerts, but IPs and malware information into threat lists so that your SIM or other tools can actually leverage that. But again, you have all types of tasks that your analysts do on a day-to-day basis. They see some type of event, and then they research particular things of that event, particular artifacts like users, information, IPs, things to that extent. So we're doing a lot of that on behalf of our customers to help automate that initial triage process, to bring that investigative analysis back to the analyst so that they can start their investigation right when that alert fires, as opposed to having to go do that big research on the last 24 to 48 hours of what's happened. So a lot of great points that Nimmy hit on, and I'm just going to echo that. There's the automation from the IPs, the malwares, the IOCs, that's the triage aspect, and then the tail end of that remediation process, right? Like, what do you do after that investigation happens? Are you opening up a ticket to then tell the firewall team to add a URL or something to that extent to a block list? How can we automate that? Is it going straight to the firewall, adding it to a block list? Is it opening up the ticket in ServiceNow or some other solution that you have in-house that initiates that to the firewall admin team? So there's a lot of ways that organizations can start, automating that process, and it just, really depends on their appetite for automation, right? So crawl, walk, run is the methodology that we take on.
No, and that's a great point. Let me expand on that, Kevin, as well. Is organizations may be nervous about giving SOAR tools this type of autonomy in order of automating, the underlying processes here in terms of detecting security events and responding without that human intervention. What thoughts do you have there?
I think it really starts with that playbook, right? What are we already doing today? And then analyzing, those tasks and identifying, okay, here are some aspects of what we have in place based on the tools that are in our environment, based on the capability of the integrations today that we can start automating, right? We're automating everything and anything that we can when it comes to that cyber attack lifecycle. But again, it really depends on the organization. It really depends on their appetite for automation. And then what gates do we put in place, right? Is there an approval process that needs to happen? Are you comfortable with your level 1 analyst doing that, or do we have to add some other gate-in process? Maybe a level 2 analyst reviews all the information, or maybe that firewall admin reviews the information. And then what other things are in place in terms of critical assets, very important people, things that we might want to check before we make a career-limiting move to maybe isolate a host or blacklist something that's, going to cost the organization a lot of money. So, there are things in place that we can do to, protect ourselves, but I think it really starts with, looking at what you're doing today as an organization, looking at your playbooks, developing the playbooks if you don't have them, and then start actually, finding where the most bang for your buck is in terms of automation is.
Sure, absolutely. Nathan, any other comments in this space?
Yeah, I would like to mention that, one of the interesting things I find about the movement to SOAR in a lot of ways right now is not just the benefit of automating the end result, if you will, right? How do we respond to incidents? How do we respond to these things? But, we've struggled in the industry for a long time about trying to deal with the expansion of all the tools we have in our environments, the expansion of processes. Information security is a risk management discipline, right? So we're involving finance, we're involving legal. So we've expanded what it means way beyond the original kind of IT scope. And I really do think that some attention needs to be paid here. That's the benefit that SOAR has brought to the table, inadvertently almost, is it's forced organizations to have to think about how they automate their processes today, like reevaluate the tools you have now in place. Am I automating my vulnerability management scanners? Am I automating processes with my SIM tools? Am I automating more things with my endpoint security products? And maybe I've been wrestling with for 5 or 10 years and haven't bothered looking at. And that reevaluation process has been a really powerful force multiplier, if you will, for a lot of organizations to have that first initial step before they even get to the benefit of all the automation for response, is to be able to really understand how they can automate their business processes today and then funnel that in properly into a SOAR product or platform to really reap the benefit of that going forward.
Sure, absolutely. Nimmy, any other comments in this space?
Yeah, just one quick comment. I mean, I hear a lot about this talk is, hey, are we going to let a SOAR or an automated solution take response? And my answer to that is, when you look at the response, there's really two components of it. There is the decision to take a response, right? Which for the most part, I think still should be left to a human being with critical thinking. But once you've decided that you want to take response, there's the grunt work of taking the response, right? Which is, okay, now I have to go into my whitelisting tool or blacklist this executable. I have to go into my firewall and add a rule. I have to go into my Active Directory and disable the user. That sequence of mundane pointing and clicking across multiple consoles, that can be automated with ease. So don't automate the decision, automate the actual sequence, and you'll still save a lot of time.
Absolutely. And Chris, any final thoughts with regards to this question?
Yeah, I think, we start by talking, should organizations be nervous about giving SOAR, this kind of capabilities? I don't think nervous is the right word, but certainly careful, right? Because we're talking about taking actions that can be career limiting, of course, but can be disruptive to users' productivity and ultimately maybe production of whatever the company's making. I love the idea that we're talking about identifying the processes that exist and then establishing some change management in there. That's going to be key. And then the other phrase that comes up a lot, right, are the low-hanging fruit, or those the most frequent actions that are taken. Now that's going to be different from business to business, right? So there's not a manual you can download that says this is what you should do for your company. You have to look at what is most frequent for your company, where are those high activity exercises coming, and address them there. And what I would say is you can and should enlist your vendors, your security vendors that you have in your space to help with this, because they are in other environments like yours. And if they are a good partner, they will help with this. The activity about building playbooks where they exist manually, translating those into technology is very easy for a vendor to do, with their tool set. And then to echo what Nathan was saying, making sure that the tool sets that we do have are playing well together, right? We should have sort of zero tolerance for any kind of a tool or appliance or piece of security software that doesn't integrate or is not extensible to make its information available and ingest information as well, so it can be part of this process.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we're speaking with the ingestion and making it part of the process. With SOAR, there's often the comment of artificial intelligence. So, Chris, when we're thinking about AI, how can that be incorporated within an organization to help in the space?
So I think at almost every level that we're talking about here, right? From the generation of the events themselves, we can implement different machine learning capabilities to do the statistical analysis to help us understand the kind of events that we are getting in our environment. That would be one. You have endpoint security solutions that can utilize machine learning to minimize the overall number of events that are occurring, because if you can stop or prevent things from happening, then you reduce the noise overall. That's another opportunity to utilize machine learning. But then increasingly on the SIM or at the data analytics standpoint, we can do all sorts of statistical analysis there to automate responses that will not have maximum impact. So you can train algorithms to identify the outcome of an action, and if that action exceeds a certain threshold of risk, then it will not take that action on its own. It would invoke a human response. So I think there's multiple levels there for AI.
Okay, and that's interesting, actually. So Nathan, as we take that response perspective and those levels of automation and machine learning being integrated, what impact does that have on the workforce, basically?
Well, this is actually a really interesting question. I mean, I think the knee-jerk reaction to this is, well, it makes everything better, right? It's efficiency, it's better for the company, it's better for everybody. But I think if you're in the trenches, and I've heard this, personally over the years when I've in previous lives as a consultant, there's a lot of concern from the staff level folks about being replaced. Am I being automated out of a job? And Nimmy made a great point about this. Like you absolutely always need the human there to do the critical thinking work and make the decisions about what's happening. I think though that the organizations that have figured this out and have approached their staff from a different perspective have been really successful. And that perspective is, we want to be able to free up these highly trained security professionals to do the things they are best suited to do. If I can automate the day-to-day mundane tasks, if you will, I can free my pen testers up to really go after my, test my primary website, or I can get my engineers to start diving into data classification studies and really understand, what kind of critical assets I have, where my critical data live. These really, really complicated things that take specialized level of knowledge. So, any organization, if you're in a management level, if you're looking to move into this, the rhetoric around, employees that might be concerned that you are looking to reduce workforce, come at it from a different perspective. Reassure them that what you're really trying to do is take full advantage of their skills and put them to use to doing the interesting things that we all got into this business to do originally, and not necessarily the the day-to-day work.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Scott, with respect to that, what best practices and recommendations can we share in terms of attracting and retaining this now top talent? And how do we source that talent?
Well, number one on the list is getting way more people, way more departments involved in the recruiting process. Right now, we leave it to HR, and they just are not up to the job. And this isn't a bash the HR discussion. This is a problem that needs to be solved with so many people. And I'll give you a great example. Look at your average job description for InfoSec or for privacy. I mean, they're shocking, and I read them regularly to get an idea of who's joining what company and what have you. And I'm just amazed at how badly written these things are. I mean, I wouldn't apply to these jobs. And think about all the people just coming out of college, just coming out of high school, and they want to break into InfoSec. There's no way that they're not going to be intimidated by this. So we need to take a really hard look at how we're recruiting people, who's in charge of recruiting, who's writing the recs. We have to do all that. I'm still seeing the same stupidity I saw 25 years ago when I finished law school. And I was seeing ads for Java developers with 10 years of experience for technology that was 5 years old. And you would think that would be gone by now. It's not. And until we fix that, we're not going to fix this deficit of finding the right people for InfoSec and for privacy.
Yeah. Right. Nathan, any perspective there?
Yeah, I cannot emphasize what Scott's point is enough. It is a real problem in the industry. I think there's a disconnect about, I think we still see InfoSec as sort of just another arm of IT. And so there's a lot of expectations that, I'm going to get somebody who's got 20 years experience and I want to pay them very little because, that's when I pay my desktop support techs. And InfoSec just isn't that way, right? This is, again, a risk management function of your organization. This is not the same thing as your tech support folks or your first line workers. So having realistic expectations of what you really need in your job specs is really critical. I also want to emphasize about, you mentioned retention. And I think there's also been a big shift in the industry when it comes to retention, because even when you do find these people, the assumption in a lot of cases is that it's either about money or it's about foosball tables or the equivalent. And, maybe 15, 20 years ago when Silicon Valley was really becoming a thing, that was true. I think compensation is still important, obviously, but, if your organization trying to retain your people, the number one thing I hear when I talk with management is flexibility. People today want to have more flexibility with their time, with their families, with their hobbies, with the things they volunteer for, whatever the case might be, and hours even. Sometimes that's just enough to not have to work the 8 to 5. So if you're looking for that kind of retention, look, be smart about who you're looking for and be realistic. But once you have them, realize that InfoSec folks are, we're dedicated to this. We got into this industry because we love troubleshooting and solving problems. And let us do it, but let us, be flexible about it, and you'll have a very happy person there.
Fantastic. No, absolutely great points. Scott, one thing I wanted to at least review is when applying a SOAR platform, what can it do to protect the privacy of personal data?
Well, think about the R in SOAR, so response. Imagine that there is some kind of incident. It could be a breach, it could be something else that requires notification across jurisdictions, and every jurisdiction may have multiple statutes that apply. So you have a many-to-many relationship. How do you generate all the notices necessary in a short time? Because remember, the standard we use is going to be without undue delay, which means essentially as soon as feasible. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. Folks think they have a lot longer than they really do. So the R part of SOAR really applies to privacy and notifying the right parties, whether that's law enforcement, that's the attorney general, insurance carriers, what have you. All of those folks need to be notified in a very consistent manner with actionable information. So that's really where the R fits into privacy protection.
Okay. Now, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things, and Nimmy, this is kind of something I wanted to put your way, was, we're in a current pandemic environment. There's remote working. What does SOAR play a role in the current normal as we're living now?
Sure. So I think actually SOAR ties into some of the needs that have been amplified when most security operations teams today and most SOCs are remote, right? I think the first one is that pane of glass, and I'm going to purposely avoid the term single pane of glass because I don't think one solution is going to be the be-all end-all, but let's say that pane of glass where security operations teams can collaborate and they have access to everything that's been done, right? What did the playbook do? What did the analysts do, in trying to resolve a specific threat? That's always been important, but what you can't do today is tap the shoulder of the analyst next to you and say, hey, what did you see, right? Can you take a look at this, et cetera? So having that single platform that captures all the activity and all the information relating to a certain threat is, I think, extremely valuable in this day and age of remote security operations. The second thing that I think COVID-19 is requiring security teams to create and disseminate use cases quickly, right? So, when COVID-19 broke out, everybody very quickly had to roll out, for example, and we've seen some of our customers do this, playbooks for employees connecting from home computers, right? Or new types of phishing that are geared towards COVID-19. So I think the speed with which you now need to react to threats is increasing. And if you can create playbooks and automation and roll that out more quickly, you're much better positioned in this pandemic.
Absolutely, completely agree. And Chris, this goes into really the process of how important is the automatic response timing with a SOAR product and a SOAR implementation.
Yeah, I think probably I would argue, just from my position, that the response time is maybe the most important aspect, because when we're dealing with the level of damage that an attacker can do given a very minimal amount of time, our ability to identify what's happening and craft a response, whether it be automated or manual or a combination, is going to be key. We need to shrink that window as much as humanly possible. So when it comes to the design and integration of the entire orchestration environment that we're creating, which is it involves multiple tools. It involves the ingestion of data from all of your different threat vectors and your different security tool sets, and then it involves the correlation of that information, and then the response that you spit out. That has to happen very quickly. So the tendency that we have to dump that data somewhere, run some analysis on it, and then get meaningful information back, I think that's an old model that has to go away. I think we have to be able to do that in real time and machine time, and that involves keeping those decisions close to where it's happening and utilizing the power of AI where it offers its greatest promise. So, we have the idea in the industry right now, sort of these competing ideas, right? We need to assume compromise because you probably have something going on in your environment you don't know about. But we have to do that without completely abandoning the necessity to protect and prevent at the same time, because it's easier to prevent a fire than it is to clean up after it happens, right? And we know both are going to happen in our environments where security incidents are concerned, but we need to invest our time and our people's talent and our money in our tool sets across both of those areas, both in prevention and in response.
Fantastic. So Kevin, when we talk about ReliaQuest, what are you doing in terms of the implementation of adoption and helping customers and partners work in the space?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, there's multiple things that we've talked about here. I think, Nimmy and Chris have hit on a few good points, right? So that single pane of glass, while it's, very difficult to get there, that's one of the things that we work through with our customers, right? So, providing a platform where they can actually, collaborate not only from the investigation perspective, but also from the response perspective with our SOC engineers and things to that extent. But also then, integrating those tools within the environment, right? What are the tools that are most beneficial to integrate, to automate tasks, to take a little bit of that, that high volume, low brain power task away from the analyst so that they can do, greater things with their time. Because at the end of the day, the engineers, the analysts at the company are, they know the business better than anyone else. They understand how things operate. So let's take out some of those remedial tasks out of their lab so that they can do some of those high-level tasks, whether it be engineering additional integrations or things to that extent. So, what we're really doing is providing that ability to, automate those different tools within the environment, increase the ROI with your existing tool sets, and really just help customers in that entire journey as they increase their visibility.
Okay, fantastic. Nathan, one of the things to address is the prioritization of threats. And how do we go between something that can be, automatable or those that need the hands-on attention? What perspective do you have there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different pieces to the prioritization part, and obviously this is near and dear because, Tenable, we're all about vulnerabilities and dealing with threats and identifying them. First of all, there's a technical component, obviously, right? We need to look at what a vulnerability really is, what can it do to an asset, and I think we also need to look at it from a context perspective, right? What's going on in the industry, in the world today? Are there active exploits happening? Are there criminal organizations that are actively trying to exploit this particular vulnerability that can make it more of a threat than not, right? So, there's a technical component, and a lot of that can be automated. I mean, there's some great products out there, like maybe ours, that do a lot of this, kind of threat intelligence aggregation to really have a good understanding of what those, the true risk around those vulnerabilities are. But where people usually miss on the prioritization aspect is there's a business component, right? You need to understand the context of the asset in your environment. How important is that asset to you? Not every Windows system is the same. Not every laptop is the same, right? My test laptop is not as important as the CFO's laptop. One database server that houses, some basic records that I'm keeping around my CD collection or whatnot is not going to be the same as my databases that keeps all of our customers' private data, needs to be protected. So when you're looking at prioritization, automate as much as you can, especially around the threat intelligence piece. But you really want to make sure you're bringing in the right stakeholders from the business side as well, to understand that asset criticality, to understand what matters most to them. And when I say them, I mean your business units, finance, legal, like all the other folks that don't normally manage with servers and workstations on a day-to-day basis. It's that discussion that you can have in your environment where you start to really be able to say, well, now I know what assets are important. I know what threats on those assets are the most problematic. And now I can bring that together and I can prioritize my workload to say, okay, let's go get the big problems out of the way, add our most critical assets first, and start to work down that process. So it's simplification, obviously, but I mean, that's the key. You cannot lose that business component when you're trying to properly prioritize what you're doing with threats.
Absolutely. No, it makes a lot of sense. Again, it's keeping that eye on the ball, like you say, that the business is the most important. That's where we're generating the value. No question. Nimmy, a question for you. Is SOAR simply for on-premise, or does it have utilization in the cloud?
Yeah, good question. I think everything and anything has to do with the cloud these days. And we talked about, maybe go back full circle and talk about what can be automated and talk about use cases. So what we're seeing is twofold. First of all, I think there's a growing appetite to deploy SOAR in the cloud. And when you think about it, SOAR is not, it's a fairly new technology, right? It's been it's been around for a handful of years, and it was born on-prem. And you think, why would a software that was created 5-6 years ago would even be on-prem? And the answer is because all the technologies that SOAR is hooking up to, a mere 5-6 years ago, were mostly on-prem, like SIM, like endpoint technologies. So, we know that security is kind of lagging when it comes to cloud. Fast forward a mere 5 or 6 years, almost every new SIM implementation that you hear of is cloud-based. Almost every new EDR implementation that you hear of is cloud-based. So for starters, so if everything is in the cloud anyway, why would my SOAR solution, why would my security operations workbench be on-prem? So there's growing appetite to deploy SOAR in the cloud, but that's just where the software resides. What we're also seeing is more and more cloud use cases where I can now monitor not just my standard on-prem threats, somebody clicked on a bad email or, downloaded some malicious executable, but then also I can apply that same concept of, hey, detection, investigation, response to cloud environments, right? Hey, new machines were spun up on my AWS instance, or somebody changed rights. What do I do there? And then also, typically by connecting to CASBs, also cloud, right? Somebody detected unauthorized access to Salesforce.com, right? Let's go and investigate that and see if that warrants a response. So there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't unify on-prem infrastructure as a service and software as a service incident response in one platform, assuming, of course, it can connect to all the relevant technology, which any modern SOAR solution should.
Fantastic. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, if we're implementing this level of automation, it has to cover the gambit of everything that we consume in terms of the underlying, endpoint detection, cloud services, SaaS solutions, things of that nature. So it makes a lot of sense that we would collaborate and have all that in, I'll not say the single pane of glass, but a couple panes of glass, maybe.
If I may, by the way, just also one quick point just on the prioritization aspect that you touch. I think what SOAR solutions, just by the virtue of the fact that they capture all the analyst interactions, allow you to do is mine that data as an additional data source. When you talk about prioritization, I think, criticality of assets is important and CVSS scores are important. Another thing that you can factor in is, hey, what did the actual security professionals think of this alert or a similar alert in the past, right? Is this an alert that was closed as a false positive 99% of the time? Or is this an alert that was escalated, right, 99% of the time? And now that you actually can capture that using a SOAR solution, that's another very important data point that you can use for prioritization, right? Here's an alert, alerts just like it always get escalated. I'm gonna give it a high priority. Or here's an alert, alerts similar to this one always get closed as a false positive. I'm going to deprioritize it, right? That's another factor that you did not have unless you capture the actual analyst activity and decision making in a platform. So I just thought that was a good point on prioritization.
Absolutely. No, completely. And in terms of that, Chris, when we look at, a security prevention strategy, we've mentioned response with the SOAR perspective. What impact does that have in terms of the SOAR's organization solution or the implementation of a SOAR in respect to prevention?
So I think I'll build a little bit off of how we started this conversation. I think Scott was talking about, when recruiting and getting talent, that should involve people from across the business, not just HR. And I think we have to have that same mentality where security is concerned. We can't just isolate security as a philosophy or as a practice to the IT team. That has to range across the business as well. And when we do involve the different business segments in this discussion of security, the security program and prevention, we can understand from them, what are the major risks that you have? Once again, the risk management exercise. And then what are the steps we can take to prevent those from happening in the first place? If I can prevent those events from happening, then I don't need to have an event to manage. So that kind of planning up front reduces the overall amount of data and activity and response that I'm pushing through my SOAR platform and my SOAR processes and my SOAR people, which allows them to focus on what are increasingly the most sophisticated and dangerous threats, which are those APTs, right? Those more subtle and more advanced threats. I think it gives us an advantage across the board because it frees up our people to pay attention to the most meaningful threats.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And finally, Nathan, I want to address one question in terms of, implementing the solution shouldn't just be within an IT or an information security function. So what non-IT business unit should be involved in really the organization in terms of the SOAR implementation?
Yeah, Wow. I mean, we've touched on some of it already in this conversation. And I think that for most businesses, it's going to change a little bit. Depends on what's critical to your business. It depends on what's really important. But I do personally believe that you want to get, we're talking about response especially, right? You want to have obviously your IT and security folks tied in really tightly to all of this, but you want to have the business units involved. I mean, these are their assets that are being responded against or to. You want to make sure that they understand how those processes work, what the expectations are. I advocate very strongly, obviously, to have legal and those sort of folks involved as well. You want to make sure that if you've reached that point of automating the decision-making process, that there's some agreement about those decisions, especially from a privacy and regulatory response sort of method. The one group that I think people forget about, and again, I'm previous lives, I've kind of lived in this world too, but your PR, communication and marketing sort of folks need to be involved in this process as well. You know, when you have an incident or when something happens that starts to fire off the alerts, your business should understand when this gets escalated to a communications level. Do we need to go to the public and talk about it? Do we need to alert employees? Do we need to alert our customers? If so, who messages that appropriately? Who is the point of communication? And even if you're just talking about internal incident response, you should have a communication plan there as well. So you have a single group that can say, we do have a known incident happening. We are responding to it in these manners. And then everyone has that consistent point of communication to rely on information for. So having whoever that group or team is going to be that handles the communications, both internal and external, they need to be heavily involved in this process too, because they need to understand when they get involved and what the expectations are for them once they do.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, we'll wrap up this panel. Panelists, thank you so much for your expertise. And also thank you, Bradford, and also the attendees. And the attendees, I'm going to make a recommendation is that you visit the virtual booths of the respective companies present if you have any further questions and how the underlying companies can help you in your cybersecurity journey. So with that, thank you, panelists. Fantastic. Much appreciated. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks very much.